thank you everyone for joining us. This is our panel on supply chain security in open source. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the threats in supply chain security in open source, and especially like impact on like university research, which we're very interested in learning about. So we are going to be hosting this panel with Professor Cardenas, and I'm going to like quickly introduce our panelists. And we're going to have an introduction to the topic itself. So kind of like give a background of what supply chain security is and some of the tools that are already out there to mitigate this like risks. And then afterwards, we're going to have our discussion where we'll be talking with our like experts. So our first panelist is Jeff Sapiro. He's a licensed scanning manager at the Linux Foundation. And he has 30 years of experience in the software industry, including 10 years in software auditing, open source scanning, and training developers in OSS license compliance. And Gary O'Neill, he's the CEO of Source Auditor. He's a co-lead of the technical work group for the Software Practice Data Exchange, SPDX, which I think he's going to talk about that later.
What that means in a minute.
Yeah. An open standard for communicating software bill of material information, including components, licenses, copyrights, and security preferences. He has contributed to several open source tools, including the SPDX Java libraries and tools, which can be found, and the link is on the website. And he's responsible for product development and technology for Source Auditor Inc., a software and service company helping software companies manage the technical and legal risks of open source software. And our third panelist, I'm going to wait for him to arrive to introduce him, but he is a security principal program manager of Microsoft. His name is Jay White. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that we can hear like a short introduction for our panel.
Thanks.
Okay.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for that introduction. I'm Jeff Shapiro. I work at the Linux Foundation. And let me just say that security is a huge, huge topic, and there's no way we can cover everything by far. So my intention is just to give you guys a very brief summary of supply chain security. Oh, there we go. Okay. So open source is a critical part of the software supply chain. And these numbers have been updated recently since I last thought about this, which was a couple of years ago. But essentially, pretty much every code base now is heavily dependent on open source. This has been true for some time, and it's only gonna continue to remain true and increase. And the amount of code, if you look at a code base, an application, a system, the amount of code that's in that system that is open source compared to say like closed source or proprietary is also only increasing. And if you look at that line on the right, the average number of components, so individual pieces, packages, libraries, jar files, DLLs, whatever, the number of components that go into the average system is just, I mean, it's just literally getting out of hand. It's kind of crazy, but it's only going up. Okay, so this is kind of hard to read up here. Pretty hard to see what it says, but the intention of this is to scare you. So what this says is they're basically the average number of outstanding critical vulnerabilities in an application. So by the way, are you going to make these slides available to people later? Because you're welcome to, and I would love for everybody to have these later on. So the average number of critical vulnerabilities in most applications, 5. This one says 24% of of organizations are confident in the security of their direct dependencies. Well, that means 76% are not confident about the security of their dependencies. And by the way, okay, this is the whole thing. So this little graphic, you can't read it from in there, but in the lower left corner, this is the source for this information. At the Linux Foundation, we have this group called Linux Foundation Research. They have come up with some really amazing research and reports on open source on a lot of topics, including security. The link at the bottom of this page will get you to the Linux Foundation research website where this report on cybersecurity is located, and I would encourage everybody to take a look at this. Supply chain attacks. So I first want to say that this applies not just to open source, but closed source proprietary. It applies to commercial environments, research, academic environments, really all environments. So none of these things are specific to just the open source ecosystem. Really, this is surprising to a lot of people. The most common type of attack on a software supply chain is what we often call typo squatting. People are downloading the wrong software. So it doesn't really matter how secure your package or library is if somebody wants to use it, if they're downloading the wrong thing, if they're not getting your software to begin with, they're getting something else. And a common attack, which is called typo squatting, is somebody changes the URL by just a little bit. So an analogy I like to use is, let's say you're going to look at your finances, your bank account, you bank with Bank of America, you go to bankofamerica.com. You get an email, that's a phishing attack, that says, click on this, and it's www.mybankofamerica.com. Well, all they did was they changed the URL slightly, and it's going somewhere completely different. And it's that's the point. Somebody changes the URL slightly or does something else, or people get confused and they download the wrong package. Have you looked at npm recently? You looked at how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of packages there are. You might see legitimate packages that are so close in name you're not even sure which one is the right one to use. So this is by far the most common type of attack on a supply chain. Less common, but still to be concerned about, is seized accounts, things like stolen passwords, somebody breaking in. And uncommon, notable, but much less common, but people think this is common, but it's much less common, is the intentional submission of malicious code. And some of the other OpenSSF, I'll talk about OpenSSF in a minute. Some other people have made the point that open source projects that have multiple contributors, has anybody here heard of the Linux kernel by chance? It's a little project, maybe you've heard of it, okay. Projects that have multiple contributors are generally resilient from malicious code insertion because you have multiple sets of eyes. One bad actor submits a PR with malicious code, and you've got lots of other people reviewing that before that code will be accepted. So it's turned out to be, fortunately, not too easy to do this. It's not impossible, but it's not as easy as you might fear. So talking a little bit more about supply chain threats. There's something called SALSA, which I'm going to mention in a minute. This comes from the SALSA specification website. So again, I apologize if it's a little hard to read from distance, but this shows that there are multiple places in a software supply chain where threats can occur. So you've got, like, in the source code, you could have a malicious contribution. You could have your repositories be compromised. Your build infrastructure could be compromised. Your packages, your artifact repositories, and one of the most common is dependencies. So that's the D down below. Typo squatting is a big part of that. My intention is not to dive into this in detail, because that's not the purpose. It's not just to listen to me go on and on and on and pontificate. It's really for you guys to ask questions. But I wanted to give you an overview of where these threats can occur. So where can you start? So as I mentioned, I'm with Linux Foundation. If you haven't heard of it, we host over 800 of the world's most critical open source projects. Has anybody here heard of Kubernetes? Cloud Native Computing Foundation, that's part of Linux Foundation. If you look at all of our projects combined, so we're a small nonprofit organization. We just have a few hundred people. But if you look at all of the people who are contributing developers to all the projects we host, you have close to 1 million software developers. That's a pretty big extended organization. OpenSSF. How many people here have heard of OpenSSF? Okay, just a few. OpenSSF is the Open Source Security Foundation. OpenSSF is part of the Linux Foundation. It's our group that is really focused and specializing in what we call doing a deep dive on open source security. It brings together some very important initiatives in security and provides tools and training and resources. There is a wealth of information on the OpenSSF website that I encourage people to look at. Another thing that's good to know about SPDX, Gary here is one of the principal contributors to the SPDX specification. So SPDX is the Software Package Data Exchange. It's an open standard to talk about software packages. So that plays a critical role in supply chain security. SBOMs. How many people here, quick show of hands, how many people here know what an SBOM is? Okay, so again, a relative minority. SBOM is software bill of materials. So everybody knows that you can pick up a box of cereal in the grocery store and look at the ingredients on the side panel of your cereal box if you care enough to see exactly what goes into making up your Cheerios or whatever cereal is your preference. An SBOM is effectively that ingredients list of what goes into your software. So it's a list of software components, packages, libraries, dependencies that make up your service, your application, or whatever it is you're building. So SBOMs have been and will continue to play a critical role in supply chain security and a lot of other important things having to do with software development. SALSA, supply chain levels for software artifacts. So by the way, SPDX is an open standard that's hosted by the Linux Foundation. SBOMs are just sort of a general term, but there is a new government mandate that if you want to sell software to the federal government, you must provide a software bill of materials. So SBOMs in the last couple of years have started to take on a whole lot more significance now that there's a federal regulation that requires them when you work with the government. So there are several standards for SBOMs. SPDX is one of the principal formats for building an SBOM. SALSA is a specification that is hosted by OpenSSF. So you can see these are all kind of tied together. And it's a framework for improving security of your supply chain. Right now, today, it's mostly focused on the build process, but it is not just limited to the build process. It will potentially be expanded to include source code and other levels and other things as well. So a little bit more about OpenSSF specifically. A couple of the initiatives that OpenSSF sponsors are a utility a tool called Scorecard. Scorecard is an automated tool. You can find it on GitHub, and it is actually run against other GitHub repos, and it will give you a score. It checks heuristics, and it will tell you from a number of different, a number of metrics, how secure is your GitHub repo? How well do you do on certain security heuristics? So it's a wonderful resource. SigStore is a standard for signing and verifying and protecting software. So we're going to talk a little bit about secure development. Like, how do you write software to begin with to make your software secure? But your software is one small piece of your supply chain, right? We talked about hundreds of dependencies that you're going to, of other open source dependencies that you're going to reuse. What good is looking at that dependency when somebody says, "Oh yeah, it's secure and there's no vulnerabilities"? If that's not verified in some way, what's the integrity of that? So SigStore is looking to address that problem. Another part of OpenSSF is the best practices working group. Originally, I was going to include more slides with these lists, and I thought it was too much. So they have, among many other things, they've produced these guides. They have a concise guide for developing secure software and a concise guide for evaluating open source for security. Very good resources to look at. So the URLs are here. If you get the slides later, you can find that info. But if you just go to openssf.org, you'll eventually find all of that too. Oh, let's not forget training. Most of you here are either CS grad students or undergrads from the show of hands here. So you're here because you're interested in security, which is great. Thank you for coming. So the Linux Foundation, among many other things, we provide training and certification, much of which is free. We have a course called Developing Secure Software. That's the link to it right there. Talks about fundamentals of developing secure software. It's free, it's online. Everybody can take a look at that. Please do. These are my words, by the way. Universities have an opportunity and, in my opinion, an obligation to train future generations of computer scientists, engineers, and developers on how to build secure software. So I don't know if UC Santa Cruz already offers a CS course in developing secure software. Juanita, I don't know if you happen to know your course catalog offhand. If you don't, you should. And I would highly encourage. Question in the back.
Yeah, so we have one upper division undergraduate course, CS 117 or CSE 117, that teaches students how to be productive in open source communities. So the first iteration of the course was basically teaching students how to submit a patch in Linux, So going through also, this could be as simple as like fixing a URL or fixing some documentation. And that accidentally actually led to accepted contributions, so that was cool. And I think it was a really cool experience for students to be part of that community.
Yeah. So for the people here who are CS students at Santa Cruz, encourage your faculty and your department staff or deans, etc., to develop a course on specifically writing and building secure software. I think it's personally, I think it's critical for every single CS student in the world at a university today and in the future to have a requirement to take a course on building secure software. So again, my opinion. Okay, last slide, and then I'll shut up for a few minutes. Act locally, think globally. So I believe that software supply chain security is not just an open source issue, it's really a software ecosystem issue. Supply chain security is, most supply chains contain lots and lots of open source, and they usually contain other things that aren't open source as well, closed source or proprietary. It could be all open source, but the security issue is really orthogonal to whether it's open source or not. I think it really is just simply an ecosystem issue. Be a good producer as well as a consumer. So create SBOMs. We haven't talked about creating an SBOM and what that means, but Software bill of materials, it's that list of ingredients that go into your application or your service. Hopefully, when you are creating something, you can get SBOMs for all the things that you're ingesting, that you're downloading. Hopefully, you are creating an SBOM yourself for the things that you are developing. And there are tools out there today that do this. They need to be more widespread. They need to mature. They need to be easier to use. And Gary and I have talked a lot about that and are involved in those efforts. But as SBOMs become more widely available, you want to consume them, and you also want to create them so that you can help anybody, especially when you're writing open source. I mean, you can write open source that's only for you. That's just fine. But most people who write open source are making it open source because they want other people to adopt it, right? That's the whole point. So if you're creating open source and you want people to use it, create an SBOM so that you can help out others. It's kind of the same thing, the last point. It's not just about my supply chain, it's also about your supply chain too. I want to secure my supply chain for the things that I'm doing, but I also want to make it easier for you to secure your supply chain too. And by using some of these tools, creating SBOMs, etc., you're going to make it easier for all of your downstream users to secure their supply chain as well. So that is the end. I'm guessing, is this Jay who just came in? So yeah, so I mean.
Yes, I'm gonna make a pause on our presentation to introduce Jay.
So I must say, we must really thank Jay for coming. I just heard he arrived last night from a conference travel. Was it from Spain? You're coming back, or?
So Spain, then Boston, and then now I get on another plane to Nevada.
So he arrived last night. He's coming here just for this, and then driving back to the airport for another conference tonight. So thank you so much for.
and that's SFO. That's how much all of you mean to me. That's SFO. We're clear. I'll grab something now.
Okay, so Jay is the Security Principal Program Manager at Microsoft. He has 20 years of IT information security experience dedicated to cyber risk, security, privacy, and compliance. He provides a combined tactical and strategic balance towards the implementation of security and compliance requirements that aligns to an organization's broader business strategy. And he believes we should exceed this standard for our customers and partners and take the community approach to understanding business needs. He's a trusted advisor and proud U.S. Army retiree. Well, thank you, Jay, for joining us. We're in the middle of our very short introduction, so I think Gary was gonna.
Let me just ask really quickly. Did anybody have any questions, burning questions on my part that they wanted to ask real quick?
We're gonna do questions for
later. Okay.
So,
All right. So I'm just going to follow on with just a little bit more of a deep dive into software provenance and SBOMs and software pedigrees. So, I mean, all of us care about software security. I mean, if you use one of these, you got a ton of open source in your hand and you want to make sure this thing is secure. How many of you have contributed to open source projects? Oh, quite a few. Okay, that's great. So think about this presentation for you because you have an opportunity to make things cleaner downstream or less clean downstream, depending on how you treat the supply chain. So talk a little bit about dependencies. A lot of people don't really know how many dependencies you're pulling in. If you're writing a piece of open source software, you say, I depend on these 10 things. Well, these 10 things depend on another 10 things. Yeah. The average number of dependencies in a node package manager, that's the popular JavaScript framework, is 85. So you write a typical application, you're pulling in 85 different applications. And this is a little interesting statistic, this is my own little bit of a scary slide, is that according to this source here, the Sonotype study, 1.2 billion vulnerable components are downloaded every single month. Where are they going? I don't know, they may be going into your application. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things you can do to help prevent this. So there are solutions out there for this today, this problem of dependencies that may be vulnerable, that you may not know what they were, to Jeff's comment earlier. One very popular set of tools is software component analysis. What it does is it takes a picture of the middle of the supply chain and tries to figure out what the heck it is that you've downloaded and tell you if there's any problems within that. But there's a couple of problems with this. Or first of all, it's a very good starting point. I would encourage all of you to use that. Many new package managers, they don't give you a choice. They run this, by default. When you actually download or install or run the package manager, it'll actually run this for you. But it has a high number of false positives. And the reason is it'll tell you if a vulnerability exists in one of those 85 packages, but it won't tell you whether it's exploitable, whether it can actually be exploited. So if something's used in a testing package and documentation, clearly you don't care whether there's a vulnerability, but if it's right in the mainstream of your code, you care a lot. The other thing is these SCAs depend on the metadata for the packages and things like version numbers, and that aren't very precise. So sometimes it just gets it wrong in terms of what the real project is, what the real artifact is that's being downloaded and studied. And there's also another solution which comes out of OpenSSF, is SALSA. Software supply chain levels for software artifacts, which is guidance on how to protect it. It's a very good way to evaluate whether things are secure. But with all of that being somewhat imprecise, there's another solution which is introduced, which I think helps a lot, which I'll spend the rest of the time talking about, is software bills of materials. So as Jeff mentioned, it's a list of ingredients, so if you pick up that package of cereal, if you got a peanut allergies, you're going to pay a lot of attention. If you're a software engineer and you care about security, you're going to pay a lot of attention. SBOMs can be done anywhere along the software release cycle. You may actually have several different SBOMs as you go through the build, the requirements, the testing, the delivery of the software. And at each point, if it's done right, you actually know exactly what is in the software because it's coming from the source. So that's the vision, is that you not only have one end piece of ingredients, it's like everywhere in the supply chain, you get this document that says what's in it. So if we start with accurate SBOMs, we'll end with accurate SBOMs if everybody in the supply chain passes it down. So those of you who are contributing code, I'm asking you to do two things. Look at the SBOMs that come in, because that's your accurate bit of information, and send accurate information out as SBOMs. If we all do that, the world will be a much safer place. There are a few challenges though with SBOMs, and right now they're just now getting built into the package managers themselves. So a lot of these SBOMs are coming from these SCA tools, and like I said, they're not quite so precise. We're having a really tough time identifying packages consistently. There's like 3 or 4 different common techniques today of having identifiers. Package URLs is the most popular, but there's several others like Omnivore, software heritage IDs. I would encourage you to use all of them. How do you trust that? And there's actually some other OpenSSF projects like SigStore and Salsa that actually help solve that particular problem. So my last slide, I just want to give you a little hint of the future. We've been talking about software, but those of you in research, you may care about other things like data and artificial intelligence and data that goes into artificial intelligence. We actually have a release coming out of SPDX where we have an AI and data profile, so we can capture things like bias in the data. So if you know your data has a bias and you want to communicate that downstream to the AI systems that are actually using that data and being trained on that data, you can actually capture that. So you can have a supply chain security for AI and data as well. Product safety is another thing that we're working on, and this is basically so that that FDA equipment that's trying to save your life doesn't have a known software security vulnerability that's exploitable. So we're extending it out beyond just the software supply chain. Software as a service, Amazon might care about this a little bit, since they do a little bit of this work. And we're working on bringing this all the way down to the consumer. I was just in a meeting with W3C yesterday. That's the group that does the standards for the web. And we were talking about, couldn't we have like a little check mark, like you do the little lock, and it's a little check mark that says you've got supply chain secure JavaScript coming down to your web browser. You can trust the site that you're going to. So we're talking about actually how to do that. So a lot of cool stuff going on, and but that again is the future. I'm more here to talk about the present, but feel free to ask me anything. So that's all I have to say. I think, oh, that's the most important part. Read the slide later, but what you can do, I actually mentioned it already. Use S-bombs. All right.
All right, so look, right on time, right? There was a lot of talk about the tools and the mechanisms to help with securing the supply chain, help with securing the code. First of all, can everyone hear me? Outstanding. And just to take a quick check on who's in the room. Students? Okay, majority of people are students. So when I talk about the Open SSF, please someone remind me to talk about our DE&I office hours, education SIG office hours. I'll start and I'll Tarantino this, right? I'll start, take the end, and I'll bring it to the beginning. These office hours are designed for students like yourselves to come and get any questions you have answered about how to form your resumes, how to posture yourselves inside of an industry that's continuously evolving. The stuff you learned today is not, it may or may not be relevant tomorrow, right, unfortunately. And how do you evolve as a practitioner in order to meet the metric and get in the, being in the career or in the field or part of the career that you want to be in, right? So I say it again, remind me later to talk more about that. But with respect to the Open SSF, there was a lot of great tools being discussed, a lot of great initiatives being discussed, and a lot of great mechanisms being discussed on how to secure your code and how to secure supply chain. Well, where's all this stuff being worked on at? I'm going to tell you about a place, a magical place. You see colors, where a lot of this stuff is being worked on. It's not the only place. It's not all exhaustive. There are many different open source communities where there are a lot of great initiatives taking place. Just talked about stuff going on in the greater LF around SPDX and AI and data and all that kind of stuff. I'm part of that stuff as well. But here in the Open SSF, we focus solely on open source software security and all facets thereof. You'll see the working groups there on the left-hand side. There is an additional working group that I just helped form, and that's an AI ML security incubating working group, where the incubating part means that we are tentacled out to places like AI and data under the LF. We're tentacled out to other initiatives and other open source communities that are working on the AI problem space, AI security problem space, but we're tentacled out so that we can build a better scope and focus on how to address open source software security concerns with respect to artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'll pause there. Are there any questions? All right. So you'll see the structure there, right? It's not structured unlike any other organization. I don't know that I want to bore you with the structure per se, but what I do want to point you to are the projects that were mentioned before. You have SigStar, you have Alpha Omega. Alpha Omega, by the way, has a wonderful mentorship program. They just wrapped up a 12-week cycle over the summer. So I'll keep in touch with Juanita. But what happens is you sign up for the mentorship program. You're in there for 12 weeks. They pay you to do nothing but learn how to do vulnerability disclosure, learn how to do vulnerability discovery, reporting, and then disclosure. Write your own CVEs, all that cool stuff. Right. So that's in Alpha Omega. SigStar is a signing product and a signing project underneath openness, so you have that there. But with respect to the working groups, come over here on this side now. Key thing, first of all, everyone in this room can participate and it's free to participate. There are a lot of open source communities that unfortunately are pay to play. Your organization has to be a member. Well, OpenSF is not different than that. There are member-based organization, people pay to be members, but you don't have to pay to contribute. You literally sign up, join a working group, and contribute. And all of these working groups here, I would encourage best practices working group, vulnerability disclosures working group, identify security threats, the supply chain integrity for the purposes of this room, but also the end users working group. And that's because once you guys graduate, all want jobs. And that's where people are at that can say, oh, hey, this kid is doing some great stuff in here. Speaking up, contributing, has some good ideas. Go right into the room there. Now, why are all these things important? Next slide here. The space button. All right, good. Boom. All right, so how all of these working groups break down under the open SSF. I helped design this look, taking an end-to-end look at the supply chain in itself, and then how each of these work groups and the initiatives under each of them, how they break down across the span of the supply chain. So how are the efforts inside of the open SSF? What are the efforts that we're doing that help advance open source software security? And you'll see a lot of the initiatives. Some of the ones in pink are either brand new or evolving, but you'll see where Sigstore sits, and then you'll go up and then you'll follow the letters up at the top there, and you'll see where that sits in the span of the supply chain. There are three initiatives I want to talk about. One was mentioned before, SALSA. There's S2C2F, or Secure Supply Chain Consumption Framework. Both of those are underneath the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group. And then there's one that I encourage everyone in here to start wrapping their minds around when it comes to programming languages, and that's the Memory Safety SIG. Memory Safety SIG and memory safe languages, where they don't just concentrate on Rust, but they're also concentrating on hardening and making better C and C++, and all those programming languages there. What's important about those? You can get involved on the ground floor. You can help shape best practice doctrine. You can ask your questions, get your questions answered in real time while that doctrine, while those guides are being developed. Also, get in on the ground floor of emerging frameworks such as SALSA. SALSA is continuously emerging. It's only in 1.0. On the build track, we're considering many different tracks to SALSA. There's a source track, and they want to consider a dependency management track, but of course S2C2F is taking up dependency management. So we're working on right now trying to build that suite out and present that to an international standards body. There's more on that. Ask me about that another time. But you can see here all of the initiatives that are currently being worked on. There, VEX was talked about, SBOMs were talked about. There's an SBOM Everywhere SIG. There's an Open VEX SIG, where these are actively being worked on and being worked on together with CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency out of the US government. All of us attend those meetings, they attend our meetings, and we're working on this stuff together, both towards advancing open source security, but also advancing supply chain security at large. Wrapping it up in a nutshell, get involved. There's plenty of room for you. You guys are young in the game, and we need your minds because my mind is old. I get complacent. Okay, I get complacent in this. It's 20 plus. I know I look young. Don't tell the bags in the mind. I know I look young, but I'm old in this. Okay? We get complacent, and we don't know what you know today. We know stuff from yesterday. We just do a damn good job of trying to ebb and flow with the times. And half the time that we're in, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Half the time we're in these rooms talking, and we're sounding great in the discussions. We're making a lot of that stuff up. And it just so happens that we have enough time in the game, and when we make it up, it sounds great because it's apropos and then right on time with the coming of the times. We have no idea what's going to happen the next day. You guys are coming in with fresh stuff that we haven't read yet. Articles that come in. We have no time to read these articles. We have no time to. I earned my PhD some time ago. I was a beast. I was one of those that if your references start referencing your references, you've completed the trifecta on research. Well, there's new research today. My references are referencing references, and my references reference this. You know, that was DOS. So please come in, jump in. Of course, I'll expand on things further during the question and answering portion, but I believe my task was to let you guys know about the Open SSF and all things going on in there. There's also another organization I happen to be on the board of directors of, and I'm not sure if UC Santa Cruz is a member of this organization, Oasis Open. It's an international standards body. Oh yeah. So if UC Santa Cruz is not part, I encourage you to become a part. And if you want to talk to me, I can get you a lot of people, because that's where you go to create standards that shape a lot of the smaller things that you use that you didn't even know were Oasis standards. It's wonderful. Go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. So Oasis Open came up actually a couple of times today, and I wasn't actually familiar. I'm a faculty at UC Santa Cruz, computer science and engineering. And so could you maybe say a little bit more also about, do you have already existing involvement of academia in Oasis Open, or is it just is it more an industry thing, or?
Oh no. We have there are a lot of schools involved, and you know what? Sadly, more international schools are involved in Oasis Open than there are domestic ones. And that shocked me when I became a board member. Looking over the span of our membership, we are heavily encouraging much more academia to get involved, just because there's so much room for fresh new ideas and new standards and improvement on old standards. I mean, when we're considering the research that gets done in academia, you're looking for you're either thinking about imperial, what's it called? Imperial. Come on, guys. Let me hanging out here. When you're studying something fresh, when you're trying to study something fresh, or when you're studying something, you want to look up the original research. Goodness gracious, man. It's been too long. Anyway, you know, when you're researching, you're taking a bit of research and you're looking up your research articles and you're looking up prior peer-reviewed studies, and inside of those peer-reviewed studies, somewhere towards the end, it says this X, Y, and Z is out of scope of this study and might be subject to further research.
Yeah, that's future research.
Right. Future research opportunities are all over the place in these standards, right? Because they're standards. They're standards based on the information you had at the time, and based on what worked at the time for the technology that was present at the time. Well, guess what? These standards are constantly evolving, and there's new technology. There's ample room for you all as academics to come in and provide that part of thought leadership. Granted, there's a practical portion of it as well, but that theory is still required, that a lot of us practitioners no longer have, because we've been practicing too long, and we lost that innocence. Right, so please, by all means.
I'm not surprised that this is happening, especially for universities in the US versus international universities, as you said, because in the US, I think professors are rewarded to be always looking at the next step, and standards are basically sort of like the synthesization or a synthesis of the best practices, right? So you try to find the best practices and you try to put them in a standard, and it's great. Yeah, I think we need that, but the way we are evaluated, you say, okay, but what is the next thing? Yeah. But anyway, no, I think I agree. We need to be involved with standards more.
Before we jump into the questions, I want to echo something that Jay said that I think is really important. Gary and I also, apologies, Gary. Gary and I also probably have a few years on most of you, may probably have a few years on you too, Jay. We have the advantage of having the long view. It's true. However, when I was a CS grad student many years ago, the entire universe of computer science and software, I could literally fit everything in my head at one time. Today, 30 years later, the entire universe of computer science, software, tech, I can fit like a fraction of a percent in my head. It is so much, the scope is so much larger today of everything that you need to know and understand compared to when I was a CS student. It just boggles my mind. It is the ecosystem is so much larger today than it ever was before.
That's why I ask you guys to remind me.
That's why you guys are important, because you're learning it all fresh.
Okay, so since we're talking about this, I'm really interested in learning, like, as research, like a lot of like us here are researchers, are PhD students. So I want to kind of ask about like what can we do as like researchers to overcome this kind of like yeah, technical barriers to like do supply chain security, and what tools we need to develop to automate this supply chain security better as researchers. Like what can we do?
I'll go. Don't limit yourself. Let me say this correctly. Become the best, most elite, become the best, most elite swimmer, tunnel swimmer you've ever been in your entire life. What I mean by that is have a focus. Have a focus. But be so elite in that focus that you're able to recognize where that focus has reach and tentacles to other areas. So when it comes to, you can get so inundated with everything happening that the chasm, as Jeff was saying, look, the chasm is so wide. I'm not sure how deep that some of these things are. I mean, it can get deep, but the chasm is so wide, so that if you're sitting there and you're looking on one end, you're gonna, oh, but all that down there is important too. When you're conducting your research, have a focus, but be aware of everything else. Don't be shy to find an article that says, well, I want to research S-bombs, but how do S-bombs relate? How do S-bombs relate to manufacture? What's the difference between an S-bomb that makes software for a medical device and an S-bomb that makes software that produces supplements? See, these are things you don't think about, right? I had a conversation with one of my colleagues with reference to S-bombs and VET statements. And I said, S-bombs sound great up until you have to disclose your crown jewels. Right? Crown jewels in every different industries are different. And S-bombs is about ingredients. What happens if you don't want, if McDonald's let those pickles, onions, sesame, what is that, lettuce, pickles, onions,
And a sesame seed bun.
on the pickles, onions, two all beef patties, lettuce, onions, special sauce, whatever on the sesame seed bun. What happens if you don't want to disclose your special sauce? And you leave your special sauce off the S-bomb. Is that S-bomb still an S-bomb for the Big Mac? Is that still do you see where I'm going? So you're researching, you'll say, well, how does this relate to this? Or how does this relate to this? Or what are the privacy concerns? Or what are the business concerns around producing an S-bomb? And how does that affect productivity? These are areas of approach for study that you can have, to be focused in that approach. And then try not to veer off so you're taking 100 years to finish your study. I think that's what.
I'd like to add that I agree with everything Jay said, by the way. I would like to add, you guys in the university environment, especially students, grad students, undergrad, are in a unique position. Once you are out in the real world, some of you will go into research, maybe potentially, tenure track something or other, but some of you will go into industry. Once you are in the real world and you are working, you have a job. I'm sure even our esteemed professor here, he has to, publish or perish and all those things, right? When you're a software engineer at a company, you have a lot of demands on your time. You have to produce. They want you to write good code. They don't want you to make mistakes. While you are here doing research, make mistakes, experiment, fail. These are the things that will teach you. What was the original question again, please? Because What was it? Please read it back quickly, the original question.
As researchers, what are the main technical barriers we need to overcome or tools that we need to develop to automate
Thank you.
security?
As researchers, what are the things that you need to overcome? What are the things that you need to learn how to do? Tools. Experiment, do research, make mistakes. When I first learned to program, so me personally, I first learned to program when I was like in the 7th grade or something. And what I found, my observation was the people who were good programmers versus the people, or good at using computers in general, were the people who tried things even though they had absolutely no idea if they would work. And the people who weren't very effective at using computers were the people who were afraid that if they typed the wrong thing, this was way before GUIs, it was only command line interface. They were afraid if they typed the wrong thing, their computer would break. Right? Now, sure, RM-RF star. Don't do that. But don't be afraid to make mistakes and experiment.
So if I could just add just a couple of thoughts. I'm going to give you a wide range of answer here. Number one, this area has a lot of unsolved problems. I mean, I'm in the working groups defining the standards, and I'll just give you 2 examples. One is this identity thing that I mentioned before. How do you identify the software? Totally unsolved. You'll find people that think they solved it, but you dig a little under the covers and it's like, no, this is not a solved
You mean
problem.
by identify the software?
So I pulled down a piece of software off the internet. How do I know exactly what it is? You know, you could say, oh, I got the name of it and I got the version, but I find the exact same thing over here and it's got a different name. Or I got a version range in this file and they refer to exactly the same artifact. So the actual artifact, it's a key problem in SBOMs because SBOMs tell you what the dependencies are. But if you don't know how to identify the dependency, you see, that's like a big gap. So that's like a really tough problem to solve. And because you got all these different ecosystems, NPM solves it one way, not very perfectly, by the admission of the people that wrote the code, by the way. They said they wish they'd have done a little better. And, you know, the Java Maven system does it a different way. And then, so how do you have a global system of naming? You need like the UPC labels for software, you know? We need something. So there's a bit of research opportunity there, maybe. And then the other thing that's kind of related is discovery protocols for these things. So if you can identify it, how do you find it? That's an unsolved problem. So just a couple ideas, but my main point is there's a lot of unsolved problems. And if you want to find out what are the unsolved problems, join some of the groups that Jay mentioned. We're talking about them all the time in those meetings. Just listen in and you'll learn. So, oh, and I guess the last thing I'll say, what can you do? What I said before, if you're writing software, produce an SBOM. That's the other thing, very practical thing, yeah.
Oh, also, one last thing on this. If you join these groups that Jay mentioned and that Gary mentioned, speak up. I know as a young new person who you don't think you have a lot of experience, you're afraid to speak out. If you join these communities, and please do, speak up, contribute your ideas. We want to hear from you. We want these fresh ideas.
If I see you in the room and you make the god awful mistake, but you see Santa Cruz next to your name for whatever reason, bet within that hour, I'll call him on.
I just also want to say that all the working groups have a like community meetings that you can join. There's an open calendar in the OpenSSF website. So, well, just adding that as part of the invitation.
And you're also invited to the SPDX meetings, by the way, too. So we have like 7 different working groups. All are open, all are public.
So yeah, I was gonna say, so Juanita has several questions planned, but I wonder if maybe there's a question from the audience, and then maybe we can
go back
I
and
think
forth.
I have one.
Yeah, please.
So it's something I've been thinking for a while in terms of supply chain security, and it's that there's no sufficient security information about the artifacts, in the sense that if you, let's say you find a vulnerability and you end up seeing in MVD a report that we found that these versions of the package are vulnerable, but sometimes even MVD or NPM or whoever releases the advisory, they don't provide enough information to the users to actually know, okay, this is vulnerable under certain conditions, and even these versions are not, all of them, they're not necessarily vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I know there is a gap there because there are companies that are making profit of that. So there are companies that offer this kind of firewalls, to mention Sonatype, they are offering this Nexus solution where they sell this particular private information to their clients. So my question is probably, I want to know what are your thoughts in order to close that gap of, there's like some private information that I think should be publicly available to everyone. There shouldn't be like companies that are making profit of that. All the details can be should be available to everyone. To everyone can actually know what kind of problems I'm going to be dealing with when I am using this particular library. So I just wanted to,
especially if it's open source, for goodness sakes,
Exactly,
we're contributing the open source, you know, we should have free access to what the vulnerabilities are, right?
Yes.
Shouldn't have to pay for that.
So I think Vex statements, the stuff that we're doing in CISA is going to attempt to help solve that problem, right? So we just produced, and now we're expanding on a minimum requirements for Vex statements, right? So that's identifying, you know, and I think there's 4 different categories, whether it's affected, not affected, under investigation, or whether it's been fixed. And of course, if you're saying it's not effective, to provide justification for that, and then that justification identifies, well, why is it not effective, right? There's clearly a CVE that's been made available for this vulnerability. Why is this particular package not affected by it, right? And you have to go ahead and write that. In my opinion, I still think there's a problem with that, because even that's subjective in nature. Somebody has to manually write that in, right? There's no unless they're conducting a penetration test and can say within certainty the likelihood of you being able to exploit this vulnerability under these conditions, right? Something enough. So I hear your point. In terms of artifacts and being able to pull from a library, there's also another tool that's currently being developed. It's called Guac.
One of my favorites.
And the acronym escapes me. Please, by all means, look it up. But it uses GraphQL. GraphQL to sit there and build that kind of table, that kind of graphic or chart of where that particular package has been, right? And what release it's in, what release was the vulnerability discovered, what release was it patched in, this sound right? So you get a chance to follow that. But there's an archive of all of these artifacts that you can then index and pull from, right? So between Guac and Vex statements, some of the problem you're talking about is attempting to be solved. But as Gary said, might be greater research there if you identify the problem space that's solved by Guac, you identify part of the problem that's being solved by Vex, and then you find the nasty, funky middle part that you want to sit there and target your research on. Once again, there's a tunnel for you to swim in.
There are a lot of.
For understanding artifact composition is the.
She has the acronym. That's for that.
I thought it was short for guacamole. Yeah.
Like a guac and salsa.
Yeah.
Is the other acronym that you know.
Yeah. I will say, in terms of, you know, that these databases are becoming more public now. And so I know Google has one that they put out there that you can query, but there's like piecing it all together. The next release of SPDX, we've actually defined, you know, this kind of pipeline. You put out an SBOM, somebody finds a vulnerability, put out a vulnerability, it points to the SBOM. The SBOM can be updated to point to that, but usually the SBOM comes first, because you're not going to release your software if you know it has a vulnerability, right? And then somebody says, oh, I've looked at that and that vulnerability is not exploitable, so I put a Vex statement out, and that points to the vulnerability. Actually, it points to the relationship of the vulnerability to the software version. So we have that kind of mapped out. But where the research opportunities are, look for anything in the standard that we're releasing where you have like an English statement for the value. There's an opportunity, because that means we didn't flesh out, you know, what it really means. It's not computable, right? So we got a few of those. Yeah.
Any other questions? So I wanted to ask, because like we started a little bit of this discussion earlier when you were inviting like UCSC to join this other organization that you're part of. I'm kind of wondering what is the role of academic institutions in like all this, right? So what measures they can take to mitigate these risks and incentivize the security practices within open source?
So I mentioned two frameworks that are being worked on, the SALSA framework and the S2C2F framework. SALSA being primarily focused around primarily being a producer-focused framework. So you're on the production side, you're actually going to deliver services or software to a consumer. And then of course, you have the consumer focus where you're actually pulling in dependencies that are going to be used to build software and services that you're going to put out. With both of these frameworks are still relatively in their infancy, and no one in the room is from academia. And does academia not put out a product? Does academia not? What's the product that academia puts out?
The part, the what?
A product. What's the product that academia produces?
Okay, the future talent of
Right. So when I part of my bio, I've been doing security for so long that I've been able to identify security as a business function, as a people function. You know, you can't have people process technology. You can't have one without the other. You can't effectively do security without all three of those. Key part in there is people. That being the case, you consider these frameworks. These frameworks have to service everyone, not just your major institutions, not just your major industries, but everyone, up to and including academia. So the systems, right? Everybody goes to school on a hybrid format, right? How many of you just attend classes only? None of them are online. Who attends online classes? No one attends online classes?
we were all back on in person.
I did damn near my whole education online. But classes are hybrid in nature now, right? So there's software being used for that. And the computers you're using, who uses Grammarly? Oh yeah, you use Grammarly. I could have been one of the inventors of Grammarly. I started using that early on when it still had bugs. But all of that software being used, all of the stuff you have access to it, you have a way to shape how all of the stuff gets developed and continues to be developed, which is important because the product that your school is producing is you. So what are the dependencies? Grammarly, Blackboard. Are you guys still using Blackboard as a platform? I don't know.
We use Canvas is the competition.
Okay, well, whoever you guys are using
similar.
but
Yeah.
these things are all dependencies. Now, what are their transitive dependencies, right? Continue down the line. See how cool this is? So fun. It's not fun.
I did a download one of those 1.2 billion packages that had vulnerabilities. Yeah.
Any other
Yeah, but
input?
one thing that, well, actually following up the online instruction. So when the pandemic started, there was a lot of commercial products for making sure that students didn't teach, right? So it was, I forget, sorry. So it was like, I forget what it was called, but it was like proctoring, right? Software proctoring. And they were basically like malware in a way, because they had access to all your information and video. And so anyway, I don't know, I guess.
And remember, if the software is free, it's not free, there's something still being sold, and that's your information. So,
The only thing I would add, I suppose, is what the question was about how you can input.
Like, what's the role in academia?
What's the role in academia?
Like academic institutions. on
So this is kind of, it's going to sound repetitive, but there's a reason for that. You guys are the fresh thinkers, right? We've been there, done that, seen it all, and sometimes we forget to have new ideas. You guys are fresh thinkers. So you see something that's missing, speak up. Contribute those fresh ideas. Keep things new. Keep things.
Yep. The only thing I'll add is, you guys have time to do research. A lot of us, our day job is, to actually, do consulting, write software. If your job is research, this is research-rich opportunity, I think, in this particular space. So there's a role academia could play, in that regard. So, and I guess we kind of hit that, on the prior question as well. So.
Okay, well, thank you. So
Any questions?
Any questions from the audience? No? Okay, I'll keep throwing things out. So, I mean, it's clear that there's a lot of tools, a lot of like best practices, like OpenSSF has a bunch of like things that we're working on. So I'm kind of wondering, like, why are we not doing this more? Like, what are the main challenges for integrating these tools and practices into the development life cycle?
So I'll go first and be brief. Some of the tools are not as mature as we would like, and we need to work on the tools. So that's just plain and simple. We know there's a problem. We're building tools to address those problems. We still have a ways to go. And a lot of it is education, again, where the universities come in. Teaching people first, understanding what the problems are. Educating people in the fact that these tools exist. Like most of you, I think at the beginning when I said how many people here know about OpenSSF, I think almost nobody raised their hands. Now everybody in this room knows at least a little bit about what OpenSSF is, what our mission is, why it's important. And now you can go to the openssf.org page and you can find, or when our slides are available, you'll have some of those URLs. You can actually find scorecard, etc. If you don't know it exists, you don't even know where to start. Right now, you guys all have a starting point. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your neighbors, tell your dorm mates. OpenSSF, go take a look. Education, right? That's a big, huge part of it. Is just understanding and just knowing that these things are out there.
So I'll just add two more votes for the tooling. It's there, but it's not very mature. They're open source, which means you can contribute. You see something in there. And there's one other aspect of the tooling that I think is important is that a lot of these tools are kind of like standalone after the fact kind of tools. They need to be integrated into the existing tools that you're already using to develop and produce software. That is starting to happen now, and these are all open source projects. So again, we can all contribute to adding it to these existing tooling, but it needs to be there so it just happens, especially around SBOMs. The package managers should just pop them out. When you build your package, it should just pop out an SBOM, so you don't even have to think about it. So that work still has to be done.
Yeah, I'll just say community. Like they said, these tools still require a bit of maturity. But a large part of what happens, why they get stalled, is because the community, that a lot of great developers aren't necessarily people, right? They don't know how to go out, engage, and galvanize, and build a community around their efforts. And open source is a community-driven situation. You have this thing that's amazing. Now you got to go out and sell it to people, and not sell it in terms of monetary, but get buy-in enough from people that they want to help you build it. Now, there's different ways of doing this. I'll give you a couple of ways. There's one way that Google's actually fantastic at, by the way. They'll come out with something, and just the name only. I'm talking about it's still like in somebody's thought or in somebody's notebook. Like it's not even they come out name only, and they'll put that name out like a year or two ahead of time. And by the time any type of feature or any type of tool or anything gets put out that halfway doesn't work right, it's been in your mouth now for 2 years, and you've been gung-ho about it. You've seen specs on it, right? Documentation, and there's been blogs all over the place. And you're like, yeah. And it comes out and it doesn't work worth a damn. But now you are so invested in it from a just a pull the heartstring standpoint. You just told all these people about it that now you have no choice but to get in and fix it. There's another way, of course, and that is to put your nose to the grind, build out that POC, run it by people, put some junk data in there, show people, hey, this thing could work, and this is how, and then, oh man, I know what we can do. We can do this, and you get another person says, oh, we can do that. Another person says, we can do this, and now you're building a community. You're having community meetings on it. You're galvanizing, and you're going through the process. It's a longer process, of course, but you're going through the process of putting hands in this thing. And you guys are all building it together. A large part of it is community inside of open source. Don't be afraid to get in with your buddies. Don't be afraid for your buddy to have a better idea than you, and then you jump on his idea and say, "That's great. Let's work on it." Right? Don't be afraid to do that. And then build out from there.
So I see that like part of the problem here is education, that there's not enough like awareness of like these tools or like these risks. I was talking about this with Dr. Cardenas, and like he was saying like if there was a class you would teach in a university to like encourage these practices, like how would it look like?
I don't know. I would start. Well, I would start with one of the best practices from OpenSSF. As a framework. Like the Salsa, or And here's where the tools fit in. Just about.
I'd start with Sesame Street. Oh God, I'd start with Sesame Street. I'd be playing games of telephone. I'd give you this thing about have you build a community, like a gated community with like an entry point and an exit point. And then every house is built exactly the same. And then I would say, now somebody have a novel idea and build a house that doesn't look the same and put that in the corner somewhere and see what happens. Oh God, I do all kinds of social experiments before anything else. And then we begin to work on some of these frameworks. Security, period, is a business function. Always has been, always will be. And what you're doing is applying technology to that business function, and then you're securing that technology for secure movement of business transactions. And every business transaction is different, of course, right? There's monetary, there's information, there's all kinds of things. It's all business transactions. But once you get down that foundational building block of business, and what does it take to build a successful business, any business venture, starting with how you communicate, right? So playing that game of telephone, then talking about how you develop a community, how you organize a community. What happens if somebody wants to change a feature in the community, or all that kind of stuff? How do you go about that? How do you go about change management, right? Go all the way up and down the line of all these different things, and then get to a point where now you're developing tools that help you open and close the gate, key fobs, smart locks on doors, alarm systems, and all that kind of stuff. Right? You see where I'm going.
Okay, so we have around 8 minutes left, so this is the last chance for you to ask a question. No? Okay.
Yeah, I just want to remind you that at the beginning of the presentation, you say about office hours.
Good on. What's your name?
Neil.
Neil. Good on you, Neil. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. So office hours are, I believe that we have them once a month, and they're usually on Tuesdays, but not going to be Tuesday next month. I actually have to put that meeting back on the calendar because it was 3 weeks that we were all traveling, so we couldn't have a meeting for the month of September. But it's once a month that we have our office hours. They're 1 hour in length, usually on Tuesdays at 12 p.m. We love for not just practitioners in the industry to come, but students, so that students can engage directly with practitioners, right? So you guys can get your questions answered in real time. What kind of things are you looking at today? How do you form and shape a resume? What kind of internships should you be looking for? Hey, this is something I want to do as a career. I've been studying this, but I don't know if this is what I want to do. I think I want to do this. Is this even a career option? Stuff like that, right? Let your imagination run wild. I love imaginations. Right? And so we spend an hour long in that. If more people show up, then I will open up more times. I control that meeting. That meeting is mine. As a matter of fact, I opened up the education, the DE&I education subcommittee under the Open SSF, and now I'm building and expanding that now to a whole DE&I working group, right? And under that working group is going to be an education SIG that has its office hours, right? So I run this whole thing. If more people show up, I have more meetings and more questions get answered for all of you. Tell your friends.
Jay, can everyone find a link to participate on the Open SSF website?
Absolutely. You showed them that earlier, right? I'm believing that you did.
Well, I showed them, I don't know, not that specific link, but
It's on the calendar. So it's on the public calendar of the Open SSF. If you're on the Open SSF public calendar, you'll find it there. And of course, Juanita has my information. If you cannot find it on that public calendar for any reason, you all have my permission to send me a barrage of text anytime. Don't worry. I know how to shut my phone off and not respond after certain hours, but you're more than welcome to hit me up and
I have a follow-up question to that. So we started a new summer program this summer where I was working with HBCU students contributing to open source, and sort of through them I've gotten to know other students at their institution, and they have cybersecurity classes actually, but one of the things that they were talking with me about was that during the pandemic, like all of their industry folks who used to be engaged and sort of disappeared from campus.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know anything about security. I teach open source, but I would love to connect some of those students with like some of these entry points for them to get involved. And I was wondering, like, where should I point them to? Should I tell them like, hey, go to the office hours, or go read this thing first and then join this working group? Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah, tell them to find me directly. I don't care. Like, tell them reach out to me. As a matter of fact, I have one of my so he's one of my old Army buddies. He and I served together. He just happens to be working in the DE&I space now out of nowhere. He's hooked me up with so many people from Africa of all places. He's like, dude, you work in open source, but you do DNI? I'm sending you people. Just start sending me everybody. Send them to me.
Yeah, I'll definitely follow up with you.
Find me on LinkedIn. She also has my phone number. Alvaro has my phone number too. Take my number down. Take my number down.
Just this is the Open SSF website, and if you go to get involved, there's a bunch of like links to ways to participate in all the groups. This is a public event calendar. If you click on there, you're gonna get that calendar added to your calendar, which, well, okay. So, why is it not showing up?
Nothing is happening this week.
No, that's not true. There's even like,
Oh yeah.
there's every single day, there's like 4 or 5 meetings.
It's ridiculous.
I don't know why it's not showing up, but
I can share mine. Showing up.
okay.
You probably just have to expand your screen a little bit. It does get. Please pace yourself on joining a lot of these working groups, because it's
I lost the Zoom. Okay, there you go.
a lot. It's a lot.
That's all the blue stuff.
No,
Or the
it's
dark
showing
blue.
up.
That's
Yeah, dark blue is the Open SSF stuff. Yeah, that's the Open SSF stuff right there. There it is. There it is.
There's also a Slack channel, and if you join the Slack channel, you can join the like channels for each of the like working groups too.
Yeah, and if you join the Slack channels, you just say @J. Chances are, I'm gonna pull my phone out. I'm gonna see it. I'm gonna say hello. You'll get. I'm too involved.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, which is not enough for another question. So I'm just gonna thank the finalists for joining us, and well, I think this was a great discussion. So thank you so much for being here.
thanks for having us.
Everyone for attending.